So, Larry, here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are, Larry. The last time you were on the show, we were heading into trouble, according to you, because we had just raised taxes $1.5 billion, and the forecast was very, very rosy for what was going to happen over the next couple of years. And you raised your hand with kind of a contrary opinion and said, this just really ain't going to happen. Well, here we are. It's a little while later, and according to what I have read, what was forecast was about a $300 to $400 billion deficit this year, and we can talk a little bit about that, about how you've mitigated against that. And then over the next 2 years, because you're doing a biannual budget, there is a $2.5 billion in real and projected red ink before you go home this June. So let's divide it in two.
Think about what you just said, Jim. Think about what you just said.
I get
After a $1.5 billion tax increase.
Highest in Connecticut history.
Ever. Then we were told, if we swallowed that tough medicine,
right.
everything will be on stable ground.
As a matter of fact, Larry,
we will have 5 years at least of surpluses.
As a matter of fact, Larry, the prediction was $226 million surplus in 13-14 and $942 million surplus in 14-15. And here we are 1 year later, 2 years later. What happened?
Well, first of all, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out what happens. When you have a deficit the type of which that we had, and the way you solve that deficit, we were told by the governor that he would solve it with three-prong approach. One, he said he was going to cut spending.
Right.
Two, he said he was going to get very serious concessions from the state employees.
Right.
And three, he said, as a last resort, his words, not mine, I'll raise taxes. And here's what happened. He didn't cut spending a nickel. Not a nickel. In fact, we spent $1.3 billion more than we had spent in the previous year. Number two, the concessions he claimed to have achieved with the state employee unions, which he claimed amounted to $1.6 billion over 2 years, he was unable to document half of that, at least half of that. So there's about $800 million that we didn't see. And lastly, therefore, if the only thing you do to solve a budget problem is to increase taxes, it never works. It never works. And what happened is that the revenue we expected to get from this tax increase didn't come in.
Right.
The spending cuts he claimed he would do never materialized. In fact, we spent more. And the savings he said he would get, he didn't get even half of that. You put those three things together,
and there we are.
It doesn't take a brain surgeon to know you're going to be in deficit. And that's what we are. In fact, we weren't even into the budget he had passed and acclaimed. We weren't into it 2 months before we started to run into red ink. And we ended the year $150 million, the first year of the 2-year budget, $150 million worth in deficit. And to pay for it, because we have to have a balanced budget, we took money that was slated to pay off long-term debt and
moved it in.
And we moved. So we took borrowed money, if you will, and we paid to just balance our budget.
Okay, that was
in 2012.
Right.
Then this fiscal year, which started July 1st, we weren't in it 3 months. We started to see 10 million, 20 million, 30 million in deficit. The governor kept saying it's just a blip, it's a road bump, no big deal. Cafaro and others are saying the sky is falling. I kept saying, let's be careful. We're going in the wrong direction. Sure enough, right up to the election, before the election, he claimed no big deal, this is not a problem. Right after the election, we found out that our deficit was $325 million, and then 4 days later went up to $450 million.
As a matter of fact, Kevin Lembo, who's the controller, he's the one that kept on blowing the whistle, wasn't he, Larry?
Right.
Kevin kept on saying, this thing is worse than you think it is.
Well, he said it, he would say it, but we kept saying it because we were checking with the nonpartisan Office of Fiscal Analysis, and they kept saying, I don't know where the governor's coming up with these figures, but we're in deep trouble here, deep trouble. And as a matter of fact, even after the deficit mitigation exercise we did on December 19th, and we could talk about that in a bit, the comptroller just came out 2 days ago and said, nice try, fellas, we're still $40 million in the hole.
Yeah, I saw that.
And that's going to grow.
I saw that.
That's going to grow.
So what was the principal reason you were given why the revenue stream didn't materialize as we expected it to?
Well, first of all, you made it, you know, there's this theory that, you know, if you increase taxes, you'll get increased revenue. Well, at some point, there's a tipping point.
There is a tipping point.
If you increase taxes on cigarettes, on booze, on
anything you can't
and
nail
anything
down.
you can't, if people could buy the product cheaper elsewhere, they're going to do that. And if you drive them to do that by making the cost of that item so high through taxation, they're going to buy it elsewhere. They're going to buy their cigarettes off the internet or take a trip down to South Carolina. They're going to buy their booze in New Hampshire. They're going to get their gas in New Jersey. And we see that every single revenue category is less than we expected to have. They've fallen off. Sales tax has fallen off. Casino revenue's fallen off. Income tax is lower than expected. Corporate tax is lower than expected.
But that income tax thing, Larry, for example, I mean, given the unemployment situation in Connecticut, that has to be exacerbating the lack of revenue collection. In other words, if I'm not working, I ain't paying income tax.
Well, absolutely. But you don't even have to go that far, Jim. Let's assume you were one of these 1%ers, right?
Yeah.
You made $2 million a year. You were fat and happy.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You might still be doing fine, but you're not making 2. Maybe you're making 1. Now, I'm not going to cry over a guy making $1 million a year, but do the math. The income tax on $2 million is a lot more than it is on $1 million. And we had a whole recession here where people were making less than they had made.
And it's also true in your neck of the woods down there, Larry, in Fairfield County, where a lot of people are fairly well off. They're the people that keep on getting beaten up. The class warfare thing. Of
course.
Right? I mean, you beat up on these people and beat up on these people and beat up on these people, and you don't tell the rest of the people that these people, this 20% of the population, is contributing 60% of the revenue stream.
Forgive me, 2%.
2%.
The top 2% of the taxpayers are pulling 52% of the weight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, you keep beating on that 2%, they're going to leave. Now it's 1% pulling that wagon.
Exactly.
And the problem we have is when you rely, excuse me, on 2% of the taxpayers to pull that amount of weight. Picture them pulling this heavy carrot. If they stumble on a rock, if they trip and fall, if there's a blip on Wall Street, forget about it.
It's interesting, though, Larry, I mean, this is a general comment, how even at the federal election level, politically, in raw political terms, how well that plays, doesn't it? Let's tax the rich to get them to pay their fair share. And it turns out like in the federal election, right? Somebody stood up and said one day, you can tax them all you want. It'll pay for 25 days in the whole year.
That's right.
What are you, crazy?
That's right.
So,
but it does. It sells great. You know, if you're
that's
talking
what
to
I'm
a bunch
saying.
of people who are hurting, and we all are in this economy, and say, you know what the problem is? Those rich guys, tax them.
Yeah.
That's easy to jump out.
Marie Antoinette said, Larry, let them eat cake.
Yeah, that's easy to
So, Larry, here we are.
But it doesn't solve a problem.
It's June of this year. We're now in 2013. It's June of this year. You guys, I mean, according to what I read, right, $2.5 billion in real and projected red ink.
Over 2 years.
Over 2 years, right? And early in 2012, the administration said we could look forward to surpluses totaling $1.1 billion over the same 2-year period. That's actually a $3 billion shift. Right. So there you are, Cafaro and his boys, and the Democrats and their boys and girls, and they're sitting there in June of this year, after he submits the budget in February, right? Where are you going to come up with $2 billion over the next 2 years?
Well, I'll tell you where we're not going to come up with it, because the governor, by his actions, took that off the table.
You mean no layoffs?
We can't lay off a single person. Not a single person can we lay off for 2 years. Now, they will say, well, hey, that was the deal you made. And in fairness to state employees, that is the deal they made.
The deal's a deal.
The deal they made. But let's talk about the deal that the governor negotiated. He said, I won't lay you off for 4 years. In fact, after year 2, you could start getting raises again, guaranteed for 3 more years. I'm going to extend your pension and health care benefits for another 5 years to the year 2022.